The radio crackled with desperate voices cutting through the thin mountain air. "We need cover. We're pinned down." The words echoed across the rocky terrain where death lurked behind every boulder. In that moment, when America's most elite warriors found themselves trapped between enemy fire and a merciless mountain, one person would rise to become their salvation. This isn't just another war story. This is the account of Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, a woman who defied every stereotype and proved that courage has no gender. When 6 Navy SEALs faced overwhelming odds in the treacherous peaks of Afghanistan, it wasn't another SEAL who saved them. It wasn't air support or artillery. It was a single female sniper with nerves of steel and a rifle that became an extension of her very soul. What happened on that mountain changed military history and challenged everything the world thought it knew about women in combat. This is her story. This is their story. This is the day when one woman's precision under pressure turned the tide of battle and brought heroes home. Maria Santos never imagined that her childhood spent hunting deer in the forests of Montana would one day save the lives of America's most elite warriors. Born to a family of ranchers, she learned to shoot before she learned to drive. Her father, a Vietnam veteran, taught her that a rifle was a tool of precision, not destruction. Every weekend, they would venture into the wilderness where silence was sacred and patience was everything. The mountains of her youth were unforgiving teachers. Winter mornings when the temperature dropped below freezing, Maria would lie motionless for hours, waiting for the perfect shot. Her father would watch from a distance as she controlled her breathing, steadied her heartbeat, and squeezed the trigger with the gentleness of a mother's touch. Those early lessons carved character into her soul. She learned that being a sniper wasn't about the kill, it was about the discipline to wait for the right moment. When Maria turned 18, she made a decision that shocked her small town. Instead of following the traditional path of college or marriage, she enlisted in the United States Army. The recruitment office in Helena was filled with young men eager to prove their masculinity in combat. Maria walked in wearing her father's old hunting jacket, carrying herself with quiet confidence that made the recruiter take notice. Basic training at Fort Leonard Wood was designed to break soldiers down and rebuild them stronger. For Maria, it was like coming home. While other recruits struggled with the physical demands, she excelled. The drill sergeants tried to intimidate her, thinking a woman from rural Montana would crack under pressure. Instead, they found someone who had been preparing for this her entire life. The shooting range became her sanctuary. While other soldiers celebrated hitting targets at 300 yards, Maria was consistently placing shots at distances that made seasoned instructors shake their heads in amazement. Word spread quickly through the base about the quiet woman who could outshoot anyone. But Maria wasn't interested in showing off. She was interested in perfection. Her marksmanship instructor, Sergeant First Class Rodriguez, was a grizzled veteran with 20 years of service. He had trained hundreds of soldiers, but Maria was different. She didn't just aim at targets, she studied them. She understood wind patterns, calculated trajectory, and adjusted for variables that other soldiers didn't even notice. Rodriguez began staying after hours to work with her, recognizing raw talent that comes along once in a career. The path to sniper school was competitive and brutal. Out of hundreds of applicants, only a select few were chosen for the advanced training program at Fort Benning. Maria's scores were undeniable, but being selected as one of the first women for sniper training brought attention she didn't want. Military officials questioned whether a woman could handle the psychological pressure of precision killing. Maria let her performance speak louder than their doubts. Sniper school was 8 weeks of the most demanding training the military could devise. Students learned advanced ballistics, camouflage techniques, and, most importantly, the mental discipline required to take a life from extreme distances. The dropout rate was 70%. Many students couldn't handle the isolation, the pressure, or the responsibility that came with being a sniper. Maria thrived in every aspect. Her instructors were impressed by her ability to remain completely still for hours at a time. While other students fidgeted or lost focus, Maria seemed to become one with her environment. She could slow her heart rate at will, control her breathing to an almost meditative state, and maintain concentration that bordered on supernatural. These weren't skills that could be taught, they were gifts that Maria had been developing since childhood. The final examination was a series of scenarios designed to test every skill learned during training. Students had to demonstrate proficiency in long-range shooting, urban combat situations, and target identification under extreme stress. Maria approached each challenge with methodical precision that impressed even the most skeptical instructors. She graduated at the top of her class, earning the respect of soldiers who initially doubted her capabilities. Assignment to the 75th Ranger Regiment was considered one of the highest honors for a newly trained sniper. The Rangers were an elite unit that conducted the most dangerous missions in support of Special Operations Forces. For Maria, it was an opportunity to finally put her training to use in service of something greater than herself. She knew that every shot she took would either save lives or end them, and that responsibility weighed heavily on her conscience. Her first deployment to Afghanistan came in the spring of 2019. The mountainous terrain reminded her of home, but the stakes were infinitely higher. Taliban forces controlled much of the region, using the natural fortifications of the mountains to their advantage. American forces needed snipers who could operate in this challenging environment, providing overwatch and precision fire support for ground operations. Maria's reputation preceded her arrival at Forward Operating Base Chapman. The ranger she was assigned to support had heard stories about the woman sniper who could make impossible shots, but they remained skeptical. In their experience, combat was unpredictable and unforgiving. They had seen good soldiers break under the pressure of real warfare, and they wondered if Maria would be different when the bullets started flying in her direction. The first few weeks were routine reconnaissance missions that allowed Maria to familiarize herself with the local terrain and enemy tactics. She spent hours studying the mountain ridges through her scope, learning the patterns of enemy movement and identifying potential hide sites for future operations. The Rangers began to appreciate her methodical approach and attention to detail that often revealed threats they might have missed. Her first confirmed kill came during a mission to secure a strategic mountain pass. Taliban fighters had established positions that were blocking supply convoys from reaching forward bases. Maria was positioned nearly 800 yards away when she spotted enemy fighters preparing to ambush an approaching convoy. The shot was complicated by wind and elevation changes, but Maria had been preparing for moments like this her entire life. The bullet flew true, eliminating the threat before the ambush could begin. The convoy passed safely, unaware of how close they had come to disaster. Word of Maria's precision spread throughout the base, earning her the nickname Mountain Guardian from the Rangers she supported. But, for Maria, it was simply another day of doing the job she had trained to do. As her deployment continued, Maria found herself increasingly relied upon for the most challenging shots. Commanders knew that when they called for sniper support, Maria would deliver results. She never missed when it mattered, and her presence gave ground forces confidence to operate in dangerous areas knowing they had precise fire support available. The mountains of Afghanistan were harsh and unforgiving, but Maria had been shaped by mountains her entire life. She understood their rhythms, their moods, and their secrets. What she didn't know was that everything she had learned, everything she had trained for, was preparing her for one specific day when 6 of America's best warriors would depend entirely on her skill to survive. The morning briefing at Forward Operating Base Chapman carried an unusual tension that experienced soldiers could sense immediately. Intelligence reports indicated increased Taliban activity in the Korangal Valley, an area notorious for its strategic importance and deadly ambushes. The valley was nicknamed the Valley of Death by American forces, and for good reason. The mountainous terrain provided perfect cover for enemy fighters who knew every ridge, cave, and hiding spot. Captain John Mitchell stood before a room filled with Rangers and Navy SEALs, pointing to satellite images displayed on a large screen. The photo showed a compound nestled high in the mountains where intelligence suggested a high-value target was planning attacks against coalition forces. This wasn't just another raid, this was an opportunity to eliminate a terrorist leader whose network had been responsible for numerous attacks on American troops. Maria sat in the back of the room, studying the terrain features that would affect her mission. The target compound was positioned on a ridge approximately 1,200 yards from the nearest suitable sniper position. The elevation changes were significant, and the morning mountain winds would create additional challenges for long-range shooting. She mentally calculated trajectories and began planning her route to the overwatch position. The Navy SEAL team leader, Lieutenant Commander David Shark Ramos, was a veteran of dozens of special operations missions. His team consisted of 5 other SEALs, each with specialized skills that made them formidable in close combat situations. They had worked together for 3 years, developing the kind of trust that only comes from facing danger together. But this mission would test that bond in ways they never imagined. The plan was straightforward in concept but complex in execution. The SEAL team would insert by helicopter under cover of darkness, approach the compound on foot, and conduct a precision raid to capture or eliminate the target. Maria would establish an overwatch position on a neighboring ridge, providing reconnaissance and sniper support as needed. Intelligence suggested minimal enemy presence, but experienced soldiers knew that intelligence was often wrong when it mattered most. As the sun set over the Hindu Kush Mountains, the team made final preparations for the mission. Maria checked her rifle for the 100th time, ensuring every component was properly adjusted for the expected conditions. Her M110 semi-automatic sniper system was more than a weapon, it was a precision instrument capable of delivering accurate fire at extreme distances. The rifle had been customized to her specifications, and she knew its capabilities as well as she knew her own heartbeat. The helicopter flight to the insertion point took 45 minutes through darkness so complete that navigation relied entirely on instruments. Maria wore night vision goggles that turned the world into shades of green, but she preferred to rely on her natural senses when possible. She had learned long ago that technology could fail, but well-trained instincts rarely did. The landing zone was a small clearing surrounded by rocky outcroppings that provided natural concealment. The helicopter pilot was skilled enough to set down without using landing lights, relying on night vision and years of experience flying in hostile territory. The insertion was quick and silent, with both teams moving immediately toward their respective positions once their feet touched the ground. Maria's route to the sniper position took her up a steep mountain trail that would have challenged experienced hikers in daylight. With full combat gear and her rifle system, the climb was exhausting work that required careful navigation to avoid loose rocks that might alert enemy sentries. She moved with the patience her father had taught her during hunting trips, placing each step deliberately and pausing frequently to listen for signs of enemy activity. The SEAL team took a different route toward their objective, moving through a valley that provided concealment but also created potential ambush points. They communicated through hand signals and radio whispers, maintaining tactical formation as they approached the target compound. Each team member carried specialized equipment for their role in the mission, from explosive charges to night vision cameras that would document their actions. 3 hours after insertion, Maria reached her planned overwatch position. The spot provided excellent visibility of the target compound while offering natural camouflage among the rocky terrain. She began the methodical process of preparing her hide site, carefully arranging rocks and vegetation to break up her outline while ensuring clear fields of fire. This process couldn't be rushed, as proper concealment often meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Through her rifle scope, Maria could see the target compound clearly despite the darkness. Thermal imaging revealed heat signatures of several individuals moving within the buildings, confirming that the location was occupied. She began mapping potential targets and calculating ranges to different points around the compound. Every possible scenario had to be considered and prepared for before the assault began. The SEAL team established their assault position in a depression approximately 200 yards from the compound. From their position, they could observe the target building and plan their approach route. Intelligence had suggested light security, but they could see sentries posted at key points around the perimeter. The mission was becoming more complicated than originally briefed, but the SEALs adapted quickly to changing circumstances. Lieutenant Commander Ramos made the decision to proceed with the mission despite the increased enemy presence. The intelligence value of the target was too important to abandon, and his team had successfully conducted similar operations under more difficult conditions. He signaled Maria through radio communication, confirming that Overwatch was in position and ready to provide support if needed. The assault began at 0300 hours with the precision that made Navy SEALs legendary. The team moved swiftly through the darkness, neutralizing sentries with suppressed weapons before they could raise an alarm. Their movement was choreographed through countless hours of training, each man knowing exactly where his teammates would be at every moment. The initial phase of the mission proceeded flawlessly. Maria watched through her scope as the SEALs approached the main building. Her role was to observe and be ready to provide precision fire if the team encountered resistance they couldn't handle. The compound remained quiet except for the team's movements, suggesting their approach had gone undetected. Everything appeared to be proceeding according to plan. The first sign of trouble came when the SEALs breached the main door. Instead of finding their target, they discovered the building was largely empty except for a few low-level fighters who surrendered immediately. Intelligence had been wrong about the target's location, but, more importantly, they had been wrong about something else. This wasn't the terrorists' hideout, it was a trap specifically designed to capture or kill American Special Operations Forces. Hidden positions around the compound erupted with automatic weapons fire that turned the quiet mountain night into a war zone. The SEALs found themselves caught in a carefully planned ambush with enemy fighters positioned on higher ground that provided them significant tactical advantage. The team immediately took cover and began returning fire, but their situation was becoming desperate with each passing minute. Maria could see muzzle flashes from at least a dozen enemy positions surrounding the compound. The SEALs were trapped in the center of a kill zone with limited cover and nowhere to retreat. She immediately began engaging targets, but the distance and darkness made precision shooting extremely challenging. Every shot had to count because friendly forces were operating in close proximity to enemy positions. The radio crackled with urgent communications as the SEAL team leader called for immediate support. "We're taking heavy fire from all sides. Need immediate extraction." The desperation in his voice was unmistakable, and Maria knew that 6 of America's best warriors were fighting for their lives in the valley below. The mission had gone wrong in the worst possible way, and she was their only hope for survival. Enemy reinforcements began arriving from positions throughout the valley, turning an already difficult situation into a nightmare scenario. The SEALs were outnumbered at least 5-1, and their ammunition wouldn't last forever. Maria realized that this wasn't just another mission anymore. This was a battle for survival where every decision she made would determine whether her countrymen lived or died. The mountain that had seemed so familiar during her approach now felt hostile and threatening. Every shadow could conceal an enemy fighter, every sound could indicate an attack. But Maria had trained her entire life for moments exactly like this. As enemy fire intensified around the trapped SEALs, she began the deadly work that would either save them or join them in death. The first shot Maria fired changed everything. Through her scope, she could see a Taliban fighter manning a machine gun position that was pouring devastating fire onto the pinned SEALs. The range was nearly 1,400 yards, complicated by elevation changes and crosswinds that would challenge even the most experienced sniper. Maria controlled her breathing, calculated the necessary adjustments, and squeezed the trigger with the same gentle pressure she had learned as a child hunting in Montana. The bullet struck true, silencing the machine gun that had been the primary threat to the SEAL team. The sudden cessation of fire from that position gave the trapped warriors a brief respite to reposition and assess their situation. But Maria knew this was only the beginning. She had revealed her position with that shot, and enemy fighters would now be searching for her location while continuing their assault on the SEALs below. Lieutenant Commander Ramos used the momentary lull in fire to coordinate his team's defensive positions. They had taken cover behind a low stone wall that provided minimal protection from the elevated enemy positions surrounding them. Sergeant Mike Tank Thompson, the team's heavy weapons specialist, was wounded in the initial ambush but continued to return fire despite blood flowing from a shrapnel wound on his left arm. The team medic, Petty Officer First Class James Doc Martinez, worked frantically to treat Thompson's injury while staying low to avoid sniper fire. Maria could see the tactical situation developing through her scope, and it wasn't good. The SEALs were completely surrounded by enemy fighters who held every advantage except one. They didn't know about the guardian angel watching over the battlefield from a ridge 800 yards away. Maria began systematically engaging the most dangerous threats, prioritizing targets based on their ability to harm the trapped Americans. Her second shot eliminated a sniper who had been trying to get a clear shot at the SEAL team leader. The enemy fighter had been moving between rock formations, seeking the perfect angle to take down Lieutenant Commander Ramos. Maria tracked his movement patiently, waiting for him to expose himself for the fraction of a second needed to deliver a fatal shot. When he finally paused to line up his own shot, Maria was ready. The psychological effect of losing 2 fighters to an unseen sniper began to impact the Taliban fighters' coordination. They had expected to overwhelm the American team through superior numbers and positioning, but now they faced an unknown threat that could strike from anywhere. Some fighters began repositioning constantly to avoid becoming targets, which reduced their effectiveness and gave the SEALs brief opportunities to improve their defensive positions. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Forge Williams, the team's communications specialist, had been trying to establish contact with the forward operating base to request immediate extraction. The mountains interfered with radio communications, but he finally managed to reach the base and explained their desperate situation. The nearest helicopter support was 40 minutes away, which might as well have been 40 hours given their current circumstances. Maria's third shot took down an enemy fighter who was attempting to flank the SEAL's position. She had noticed movement in her peripheral vision and turned her scope to investigate. The fighter was using natural cover to approach the Americans from their blind side, carrying explosives that would have devastated the team if he had reached his intended position. Maria's bullet stopped him 30 yards short of his target, but she knew other fighters were probably attempting similar flanking maneuvers. The battle intensified as more Taliban reinforcements arrived from positions throughout the valley. Maria could see vehicles approaching on the mountain roads, carrying additional fighters and heavy weapons that would make the SEALs' situation hopeless. She began engaging these reinforcements at extreme range, using the skills her instructors had taught her about leading moving targets and compensating for multiple variables simultaneously. Petty Officer Second Class Alex Speed Rodriguez, the team's demolitions expert, had been carrying explosive charges intended for the original mission. Now he was preparing to use those charges defensively, creating obstacles that would slow enemy fighters attempting to overrun their position. The irony wasn't lost on him that explosives meant to destroy the enemy compound might now be their only chance of survival. Maria's ammunition supply was becoming a concern as she continued engaging targets across the battlefield. Each shot had to count because resupply was impossible in her current position. She prioritized targets carefully, focusing on enemy fighters with heavy weapons or those in positions to cause maximum damage to the SEAL team. Her shooting had become a deadly rhythm of observation, calculation, and execution. The Taliban fighters began using coordinated assaults, attacking the SEALs from multiple directions simultaneously. Maria found herself engaging targets as fast as she could acquire them, switching between different sectors of the battlefield to counter each new threat. Her rifle became an extension of her body, moving smoothly between targets with practiced efficiency that came from thousands of hours of training. Petty Officer First Class Carlos Bear Gonzalez, the team's youngest member at 24 years old, had never experienced combat this intense during his 3 years with the SEALs. He maintained disciplined fire control despite the chaos around him, but Maria could see through her scope that his ammunition was running dangerously low. All the SEALs were facing the same problem, and enemy fighters seemed to sense that American resistance was weakening. A particularly dangerous moment came when Taliban fighters launched a coordinated assault from 3 directions simultaneously. Maria had to make split-second decisions about which targets posed the greatest immediate threat to the trapped SEALs. She engaged a rocket-propelled grenade operator first, then shifted to eliminate a machine gunner, before targeting fighters approaching with small arms. Each shot had to be perfect because there was no time for corrections. The radio communications between Maria and the SEAL team became increasingly urgent as their situation deteriorated. Lieutenant Commander Ramos coordinated his team's defensive fire while providing Maria with target priorities and battlefield intelligence. The trust between the sniper and the ground team had to be absolute, as friendly fire in these conditions could be catastrophic. Maria's scope revealed enemy fighters preparing for what appeared to be a final assault. They had brought forward their heavy weapons and were positioning for an overwhelming attack that would destroy the SEALs' defensive position. She could see the determination in their movements and knew that this would be the critical moment when everything would be decided. The next few minutes would determine whether 6 American warriors would go home to their families or become casualties of a war that seemed to have no end. As enemy fighters began their final advance, Maria made a decision that went against every principle of sniper tactics she had ever learned. Instead of maintaining her concealed position for maximum survival, she began engaging targets rapidly and aggressively, drawing enemy attention to herself to protect the SEALs below. She knew this would expose her position to counterattack, but 6 lives hung in the balance. The mountain that had witnessed countless battles throughout Afghanistan's violent history was about to witness something unprecedented. A single American woman was about to take on an entire Taliban force in a desperate attempt to save 6 of her country's finest warriors. The odds were impossible, the situation was hopeless, but Maria Santos had never learned how to quit. She had been shaped by mountains her entire life, and now she would make her stand on this mountain, whatever the cost. Her father had taught her that courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was doing what needed to be done despite being afraid. As enemy fighters closed in on both her position and the SEALs below, Maria felt the fear but embraced the mission. She was no longer just a sniper providing overwatch. She had become the last line of defense between 6 American heroes and certain death. Maria's rapid engagement of multiple targets had the intended effect of drawing enemy fire away from the trapped SEALs, but it also revealed her position to every Taliban fighter in the valley. Bullets began impacting the rocks around her hide site as enemy snipers tried to eliminate the threat that had been devastating their forces. She had to abandon her carefully prepared position and begin moving constantly to avoid the incoming fire that was increasing in accuracy and intensity. The tactical situation had evolved into something that military manuals never adequately described. Maria was now fighting a running battle against dozens of enemy fighters while trying to maintain effective fire support for the pinned SEAL team. She used every piece of cover the mountain provided, moving from position to position like a deadly ghost that appeared just long enough to eliminate a target before vanishing again. Lieutenant Commander Ramos could see tracers flying toward Maria's last known position and realized the incredible sacrifice she was making. She had revealed herself to save his team, and now she was fighting for her own survival while continuing to provide the fire support that was keeping them alive. He coordinated his team's movements to take advantage of the opportunities Maria created each time she eliminated an enemy threat. The Taliban fighters were becoming increasingly frustrated and disorganized as their carefully planned ambush turned into a nightmare. They had expected to overwhelm a small American team quickly and disappear back into the mountains before reinforcements could arrive. Instead, they were being systematically destroyed by an enemy they couldn't see until it was too late. Some fighters began withdrawing from their positions, unwilling to face an opponent who seemed capable of striking anywhere at any time. Maria's ammunition was running critically low, forcing her to make each shot count more than ever before. She had started the mission with 40 rounds of match-grade ammunition, and now she was down to her last 8 bullets. Every target had to be prioritized based on immediate threat level to the SEAL team, which meant she had to let some enemy fighters escape rather than waste precious ammunition on less dangerous targets. The SEALs were facing their own ammunition crisis as the prolonged firefight had depleted their combat loads faster than anticipated. Sergeant Thompson was down to his last magazine, and the team medic had been forced to use his rifle ammunition to help maintain defensive fire. Chief Williams continued trying to coordinate helicopter extraction, but the landing zone was still too hot for aircraft to safely approach. A breakthrough moment came when Maria spotted enemy fighters setting up a mortar position that would have been devastating to the exposed SEAL team. The range was extreme, nearly 1,500 yards, and she had to account for significant elevation changes that affected bullet trajectory. With only 7 rounds remaining, missing wasn't an option. She took extra time to calculate the shot precisely, controlling her breathing despite the stress of incoming fire. The bullet struck the mortar operator in the center of his chest, causing him to collapse onto the weapon and disrupting the entire position. The other fighters around the mortar scattered, abandoning the weapon that would have ended the battle in their favor. Maria had eliminated the most dangerous threat on the battlefield, but she knew more enemy reinforcements were still approaching and her ammunition situation was becoming desperate. Petty Officer Rodriguez had managed to create improvised explosive barriers around the SEAL's position using charges intended for the original mission. These obstacles forced enemy fighters to approach from predictable routes, which Maria could cover with her remaining ammunition. The coordination between the ground team and their Overwatch sniper had evolved into something approaching telepathic communication. Maria's sixth-to-last shot eliminated an enemy fighter who was attempting to use a rocket-propelled grenade against the SEAL's defensive position. She had seen him preparing to fire and had milliseconds to prevent a catastrophic hit on her countryman. The shot was rushed by necessity, but years of training under pressure had prepared her for exactly these moments when there was no time for perfect setup. The psychological impact of losing key personnel was beginning to affect enemy morale significantly. Taliban fighters who had been advancing aggressively were now moving with extreme caution, knowing that death could come from any direction without warning. Some positions that had been providing effective fire support were abandoned as fighters refused to expose themselves to Maria's deadly accuracy. Chief Williams finally received confirmation that helicopter gunships were en route to provide fire support and extraction. The estimated time of arrival was 12 minutes, which seemed like an eternity given their current situation. The SEALs had to hold their position and Maria had to continue her deadly work with only 5 rounds remaining in her ammunition supply. Maria's next shot took down a Taliban commander who had been trying to reorganize his fighters for another coordinated assault. She had identified him through her scope by observing communication patterns and movement of other fighters around his position. Eliminating leadership in combat situations often created confusion that could be exploited, and this shot had exactly that effect on the remaining enemy forces. The mountain battlefield had become a graveyard for Taliban fighters who had underestimated both the determination of trapped American warriors and the skill of their guardian angel. Bodies littered the terrain around the compound, testament to Maria's precision and the SEAL's disciplined defensive fire. But the battle wasn't over, and both sides knew that the next few minutes would determine the final outcome. Enemy fighters began a desperate final assault, knowing that American air support would arrive soon and end their opportunity to eliminate the Special Operations Team. Maria could see them massing for an all-out attack that would overwhelm the SEALs through sheer numbers. She had 4 rounds left to stop what appeared to be at least 20 fighters advancing from multiple directions simultaneously. The mathematics of the situation were impossible, but Maria had never been good at accepting mathematical limitations. She began engaging the most dangerous targets first, prioritizing fighters carrying heavy weapons or those closest to overrunning the SEAL's position. Each shot had to eliminate not just a single enemy, but had to create maximum disruption to the overall assault. Her third-to-last round stopped a fighter carrying explosives who had nearly reached the stone wall where the SEALs had taken cover. The man was only yards away from a position where his charges would have been devastating to the entire team. Maria's shot not only eliminated him but caused his explosives to detonate, creating additional casualties among nearby attackers and further disrupting their assault. With only 2 rounds remaining, Maria faced the most difficult decision of her military career. She could see multiple targets that posed immediate threats to the SEAL team, but she had to choose which ones to engage and which ones to let through. The weight of that decision pressed down on her like the mountain itself, knowing that her choices would determine who lived and who died. The sound of approaching helicopter rotors began to echo through the valley, but Maria knew the aircraft were still several minutes away from being able to provide effective support. The SEALs had to survive just a little longer, and she had to make her final 2 shots count for everything. The battle that had started as a routine special operations mission had become a legendary fight for survival that would be remembered long after the mountains forgot the names of those who fought there. As enemy fighters made their final desperate rush toward the SEALs' position, Maria prepared to take the shots that would define her career and possibly save 6 American lives. The mountain wind had calmed to almost nothing, and the pre-dawn darkness was beginning to give way to the first hints of sunrise. In that moment of perfect stillness, with everything balanced on the edge of a knife, Maria Santos prepared to fire the most important shots of her life. Maria's second-to-last shot eliminated the enemy fighter who posed the greatest immediate threat to Lieutenant Commander Ramos. The Taliban fighter had managed to get within 30 yards of the SEAL team leader and was preparing to throw a grenade that would have been catastrophic in their confined defensive position. Maria's bullet arrived a split second before the grenade left his hand, causing it to detonate among his own fighters instead of the Americans he had intended to kill. The explosion created chaos among the attacking forces, but Maria couldn't celebrate because another enemy fighter was charging directly toward Petty Officer Gonzalez's position with a loaded rocket-propelled grenade launcher. She had 1 bullet left and multiple targets that could kill the men she had sworn to protect. Time seemed to slow as she made the hardest choice of her military career, knowing that this single shot would determine whether she had saved 6 lives or merely delayed their deaths. Her final bullet struck the RPG operator center mass, causing him to collapse before he could fire the weapon that would have devastated the SEAL team's defensive position. The launcher clattered uselessly among the rocks, its deadly payload unused. Maria's rifle was now empty, her ammunition exhausted, but she had bought the precious seconds that would make all the difference in the world. The sound of helicopter gunships filled the valley as 2 AH-64 Apache helicopters crested the mountain ridge and immediately began engaging enemy positions with devastating firepower. The pilots could see the tactical situation clearly through their advanced targeting systems, identifying enemy fighters and eliminating them with precision that only modern technology could provide. The balance of the battle shifted instantly and decisively in favor of the Americans. Enemy fighters who had been advancing confidently just moments before were now scrambling for cover or trying to flee the valley entirely. The Apache helicopters methodically destroyed every Taliban position they could identify, using 30mm cannon fire and Hellfire missiles to eliminate threats that had been pinning down the SEAL team for hours. The mountain that had been an enemy stronghold became a death trap for those who had set the ambush. Lieutenant Commander Ramos used the distraction created by the helicopter attack to coordinate his team's movement toward an extraction point that had been cleared by the gunships. Each SEAL was exhausted from hours of intense combat, wounded to varying degrees, and running on pure determination and training. They moved with the discipline that had made them legendary, even under these extreme circumstances. A CH-47 Chinook helicopter approached the extraction point while the Apache gunships continued to suppress any remaining enemy resistance in the area. The Chinook's crew had volunteered for this mission despite the extreme danger, knowing that 6 American warriors needed them to risk everything for their chance to come home. The pilots skillfully maneuvered the large aircraft into a landing zone that was barely adequate for an aircraft of its size. Maria had begun her own movement toward the extraction point, but she was nearly a mile away from where the SEALs would be picked up. The helicopter crews knew about her location and had planned to extract her after securing the primary team, but the tactical situation was changing rapidly as enemy reinforcements continued to arrive in the valley. Every minute on the ground increased the risk to all personnel involved in the rescue operation. The SEALs reached the extraction point with ammunition nearly depleted and several team members requiring immediate medical attention. Sergeant Thompson's arm wound had worsened during the prolonged firefight, and Petty Officer Martinez had suffered a concussion from a near-miss explosion. Chief Williams had maintained communications throughout the battle despite a shrapnel wound to his leg that made movement painful. As the SEALs boarded the Chinook helicopter, Lieutenant Commander Ramos insisted on waiting for Maria despite the increasing danger to the extraction team. He had watched her sacrifice her own safety to save his men, and he was determined that no one would be left behind on this mountain. The helicopter crew understood his position but warned that they could only wait a few more minutes before enemy fire would make extraction impossible. Maria was running across the rocky terrain with enemy fighters pursuing her position when she heard the distinctive sound of the Chinook's engines spinning up for takeoff. She knew the aircraft couldn't wait much longer without risking everyone on board, but she was still several hundred yards from the landing zone. Her body was exhausted from hours of combat and movement across difficult terrain, but she found reserves of strength she didn't know she possessed. The Apache helicopters provided covering fire as Maria made her final sprint toward the extraction point, eliminating enemy fighters who were trying to intercept her route. The coordination between all aircraft and ground personnel represented military teamwork at its finest, with every person involved risking their lives to ensure that all Americans came home safely. Maria dove through the open rear ramp of the Chinook just as enemy mortar rounds began impacting around the landing zone. The helicopter lifted off immediately, gaining altitude and speed to escape the effective range of ground-based weapons. As the aircraft cleared the mountain peaks, everyone on board realized they had just survived something that most people would never understand or believe. The flight back to Forward Operating Base Chapman was filled with the kind of silence that comes after surviving impossible odds. The SEALs were receiving medical attention from the helicopter's medic, but their eyes kept returning to the woman who had saved their lives. Maria sat quietly in the corner, her rifle across her knees, looking like any other soldier except for the calm confidence that marked her as something special. Lieutenant Commander Ramos approached Maria during the flight and offered her the highest compliment a Navy SEAL could give. He told her that she fought like a SEAL, and that his team would be honored to work with her again anytime. Maria simply nodded and replied that she was just doing her job, but everyone on the helicopter knew they had witnessed something extraordinary. The aftermath of the mission included extensive debriefings and after-action reports that documented every aspect of the operation. Maria's actions were officially recognized through military awards and commendations, but, more importantly, they changed perceptions about women in combat roles throughout the special operations community. Her performance under extreme pressure had proven capabilities that some people had doubted could exist. The 6 Navy SEALs returned to their families with stories they would never fully share, but with gratitude they would never forget. Each of them knew they owed their lives to a woman from Montana who had learned to shoot in forests that prepared her to save warriors in mountains half a world away. Their children would grow up with fathers who came home because one person refused to accept that the mission was impossible. Maria continued her military service with the quiet professionalism that had always defined her character. She never sought recognition for her actions on that mountain, preferring to let her performance speak for itself. Other soldiers began requesting her support for their missions, knowing that having Maria as overwatch meant they had the best possible chance of coming home safely. The mountain where the battle took place returned to its eternal silence, showing no permanent signs of the desperate fight that had occurred there. But the story of what happened would be passed down through military units and families, becoming part of the legend of American warriors who never quit and never leave anyone behind. The Valley of Death had claimed many lives during the war in Afghanistan, but, on one particular night, it had been denied 6 more by the skill and courage of a single American woman. Years later, when military historians studied the battle, they would note that Maria Santos had fired 39 shots and eliminated 37 enemy fighters, a success rate that redefined what was considered possible in combat conditions. But the numbers never told the complete story of how one person's dedication, skill, and sacrifice had saved 6 lives and changed military history forever. The bond forged between Maria and the SEAL team on that mountain lasted long after their military service ended. They remained connected through the understanding that they had shared something few people ever experience, a moment when training, courage, and determination combined to overcome impossible odds. They had looked death in the face and refused to blink, and that shared experience created connections that would last their entire lives. Maria eventually returned to Montana after her military service, but she carried with her the knowledge that when it mattered most, when 6 American heroes needed someone to stand between them and certain death, she had been ready. The mountains of her childhood had prepared her for the mountains of Afghanistan, and she had proven worthy of both the training she received and the trust placed in her by her country and her fellow warriors. The story of Staff Sergeant Maria Santos and the night she saved 6 Navy SEALs became part of American military legend, proving that heroism comes in many forms and that courage has no gender. When the stakes were highest and the odds were impossible, one woman with a rifle and unshakable determination had made the difference between tragedy and triumph. The mountains had shaped her, the military had trained her, but that night had defined her as one of America's finest warriors.